On trade, I was in Davos recently. I only managed to attend 2 sessions of the World Economic Forum because the rest of the time was devoted to trying to kickstart the Doha round of multilateral trade negotiations that stalled in 2008. And Indonesia is a strong partner there. Mari Pangestu was there with us. There were 24 trade ministers in all. And certainly the pro-reformers, the liberalisers, count Indonesia as an ally. And that's great because Indonesia is a member of the Cairns Group, but the whole trade liberalisation effort through Doha, of course, is centres on agriculture, but there are really important prospects for better access to markets in manufactured goods and in services. So we are working very closely with Indonesia in that important forum. Our own relationship between the 2 countries has got a lot of room, a lot of upside potential. Our two-way trade last financial year was about $12 billion, which makes Indonesia our 12th largest trading partner, but the fact is that over the past 10 years, Indonesia has slipped from being our 3rd largest trading partner in ASEAN, amongst ASEAN countries, to our 4th. So this is why I say that there's a lot of upside potential. We've actually slipped somewhat. Now, you'd be aware that of the successful conclusion of an ASEAN Australia-New Zealand free trade agreement. I think that's important. It's a genuine, high-quality liberalising agreement. We're just working with Indonesia on the last bit of transposition, which is jargon, for ensuring that we carry that agreement over into the letter of the tariff reductions, where the tariff lines don't necessarily line up between countries. Anyway, that exercise has taken a little while, but I think we're very close. And once that transposition is settled, then we move formally into negotiations for an economic partnership agreement between our 2 countries. Now, that economic partnership agreement was launched by the Prime Minister Gillard and President Yudhoyono in November of last year. I was involved in the decision to get that launched, again with Mari Pangestu and her role with the coordinating minister. And key to getting a successful launch was Australia's willingness and indeed keenness to be involved in capacity building in Indonesia to help generate community support for a trade agreement that goes beyond the ASEAN Australia-New Zealand Free Trade Agreement. So you can see we're pretty ambitious. We settle one agreement and before the ink is even dry on that, we're into the next one. Now, I suppose some people could say, well, you know, is this really going to happen? I think it really is going to happen because of the commitment at the highest levels of the Indonesian government to making sure this happens. And I'm very keen to ensure too that it does transpire. And I think with these sorts of agreements, if we can do them sooner rather than later, and I'm not going to put a time frame on it, but if we can do them sooner rather than later and then just get it salted away, that's the best approach rather than have it go on for year after year after year. So that's where we want to be in terms of the agreement. I know that at the moment, what's happening in Indonesia is a community consultation, that is with business in particular, laying the groundwork for the commencement of negotiations for the agreement. And I think that's incredibly important because it is easy for people who are either opposed to trade liberalisation or who aren't sure about it to imagine the sorts of negotiations that might take place rather than having good knowledge of them. But if they have good knowledge of them, if they understand what's at stake and the opportunities that are available, then people who become sceptics or opponents may soon become allies. And I think that's what's happening in Indonesia, and it's a very wise phase in terms of the Indonesian government's approach to an economic partnership with Australia. Lay the groundwork, make sure that people are comfortable, tell them what's at stake, and then we move forward. So that's the phase that we are going to start very soon. I had a phone conversation with Trade Minister Murray Pengestu on Friday, and I think that the negotiations now are moving very quickly into the formal stages, with the presence of the Vice Minister here, who I understand has experience in the coordinating Minister's office, and so that's a real asset to the negotiations themselves. Now, the truth is, we've got some positive developments in relation, just in the last little while, in terms of our relationships between our two countries and doing indeed investment in Indonesia. The ANZ and Commonwealth banks are increasing their presence. The Commonwealth Bank is expected to open its 100th branch in Indonesia by the middle of this year. Indonesia is now our third largest agricultural market, behind Japan and China. 10 years ago, it was our sixth largest. And it is a big market for live cattle, wheat and wheat flour. So there's a lot happening in terms of our relationship. And this year, Austrade celebrates 75 years in Indonesia. And we want to continue that strong Austrade presence in Jakarta, assisting our Australian exporters, as well as Indonesian companies looking to invest in Australia and Australian companies looking to invest in Indonesia. Our two countries are two of the largest economies in the region. I have a personal view that with the strong growth that's going on in Indonesia, with the pro-liberalisation philosophy of this government and the very size of the Indonesian population, that the relationship between our two countries is going to be an incredibly important one and an incredibly productive one over the coming years. And from Australia's point of view, we really want to give that, in our terms, a red-hot go. We really want to make sure that we are taking every opportunity and building every possible relationship between these two countries. It's important to the region, it's important to our two countries, it's important to poverty alleviation in Indonesia, and I think that there's nothing but wonderful potential between our two countries. And as Trade Minister, and I think I can speak on behalf of the Prime Minister, will make every effort that we possibly can to build that relationship, to deepen it and strengthen it. Thank you very much indeed.
Minister, thanks for that. Ian Satchwell, I'm a trade and investment advisor. You mentioned Indonesian economic reform. Australia's had 25 years of economic reform. It's not always been easy, but I think the results speak for themselves in terms of our economic resilience. From your knowledge of, deep knowledge of that economic reform, which you had a big hand in, and your knowledge of the Indonesian economy, how do you see the complementarities working with our skills and experience, and having learned from some of our mistakes in assisting Indonesia with its economic reform aspirations?
I think what happened in Australia leading up to the reform period is that there was a presence of academics, what was then called the Industries Assistance Commission, and others advocating reform against the common view, which is still widely held, that reducing tariffs, for example, is bad for a country, and why should we reduce tariffs when other countries don't reduce theirs? It's a little bit like saying, why should we get fit for an athletics competition if other countries won't agree to get fit as well? Well, I'd be saying, well, if other countries don't agree to get fit for a competition, that gives us an even better competitive edge. So rather than making it conditional, reform in Australia conditional on reform elsewhere, you should say, well, you make your own arrangements, but we're going to reform. That's called unilateralism, as you know. And people in the general public would say that's insane, but it hasn't been insane at all. It's been the bedrock of 20 years of sustained economic growth in this country, because when you open up your businesses to international competition, it obliges them to be efficient, it obliges them to cut costs to come up with the best possible price, and really importantly, it obliges them to innovate. And if you're not if you're in the open competitive market and someone else has a good innovation and you're not interested in adopting it, you'll go out the back door. So it's a way of saying that in respect of Indonesia, I think what Australia can do is reinforce the sort of work that Mari is doing, and senior people in the Indonesian system are doing, but also acknowledge that Indonesia itself wants to be able to use good ideas. And I think technology transfer in terms of our relationships through an economic partnership agreement is important in that regard. I don't think Indonesia would see it of great value that all we do is export to Indonesia and it exports to us, but there's no investment in and support for know-how in Indonesia. So I think that's a way where we can actually reassure a public in Indonesia that we believe in the long-term future of Indonesia, and we're not there just for a few bucks in the short term, but we do want to be part of Indonesia's growth and success story.